the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and today is Monday, June 17th, 2019. I have the very distinct honor and great pleasure of welcoming back to the show someone who I have a great deal of respect for. He is the publisher of Arcadia Economics. He's a very creative songwriter and exceptional musician. He's also a broker for Miles Franklin, and as you all have probably figured out by now, if I haven't told you already, Miles Franklin is sponsoring the Daily Coin, which we are very grateful for. We just want to thank Miles Franklin for their sponsorship. Have Chris on. We're going to talk about, get an update on market activity. And this month I'm going to ask him a series of questions that I'm going to continually ask him so we can get an idea of what's happening in the physical market. And we're also going to talk about what's actually happening right now. Chris, welcome back to the Daily Coin.
Thank you, Rory. Always a pleasure to be here and catch up with you, and certainly fascinating times in the gold and silver markets as usual.
It is. Right now, everything seems to be, the markets are gyrating in ways that we haven't seen in some time, and while it's exciting, it's nerve-wracking, and it's exciting, and it's nerve-wracking. And so now it seems to be a pretty good time. And did I say Chris Marcus? If I didn't, I'm going to say Chris Marcus is on the line with us. So,
yeah. It's fascinating, especially we see silver right around that $15 mark. Broke through on Friday for about 5 or 10 minutes, then got whacked down a little bit lower. But like you said, certainly a lot to dig into today.
Yeah. Now Friday, I was watching. When I woke up and opened up, started getting everything turned on. It was a few minutes after 5 a.m. Central Time, and the markets were set up perfectly. The way that the charts were moving is like, and I captured a screenshot of it, and it was like, okay, we've seen this pattern 100 times in the last decade, and this is a perfect setup for a massive smash down. And I captured that screen, started writing about it, warning everybody, saying this is coming, and updated that article 2 or 3 times throughout the day. And of course, and about 8 or 9 o'clock, even before the pit opened, the New York market, well, right after the pit opened, I said that there was going to be a smash that would knock both gold and silver below Thursday's close, because they would want the charts as ugly as possible. And I nailed it, unfortunately.
Yeah, sure enough, that's what happened. And it is interesting to think about how you have what's actually happening in supply and demand of silver, and then, which, as you and many others have commented on, how is often divorced from the actual supply and demand fundamentals. Certainly with silver below $15, we're talking about companies going through a lot of effort to dig silver out of the ground to, at this level, sell it at a loss. We've seen a lot of mine closures, and it's becoming tricky for a lot of these miners. So again, you have a lot of factors indicating the supply is down while the uses of silver continue to grow. And it's interesting to think about how that ultimately plays out, because, in the near term, when these things are determined by a bunch of different hedge funds and banks buying massive amounts of silver that they don't have, or selling massive amounts of silver that they don't have, as a former options trader, I would say that this isn't the way that I would advocate running the markets, yet okay, that's how it's set up and works now, yet everything continuing to lead towards a situation where you have some sort of break point. And it was interesting, I was checking in about some of the activity on the premiums for you this week, and the premiums have been creeping up a little, perhaps on some of the numismatics, but often what happens is right now the price of silver is low, and in the West, the trading ideology, often people start buying once the price moves up,
Right.
which certainly it's fascinating comparing to some of the cultures in the East where, we hear time and time again on these spikes down, they're happy to buy things when the price is low. Um, so it's a fascinating divergence in the way people look at things
Yes.
at what often happens, at what happened back in 2008 and 2011, is that once people start buying, you're talking about an asset, a commodity here, where there's not just massive piles of it lying around like the price might indicate. And once you see, perhaps maybe that'll happen. I know there's a couple moving averages around the 14.90 and $15 mark in silver. So really, once you see just a little bit of buying, which kind of kicks in a cascading effect, that's when I would expect you'll also see the premiums go back up. And it was interesting, was talking with Andy Sheckman, the founder of Miles Franklin. He was mentioning how right now the premiums are still pretty in line, but as we've seen, especially in the silver market, gold market as well, but when you actually see retail buying, especially in the US here, and people are actually trying to get physical metal in a market that's scarce, that's when I would imagine you'll see the premiums move, and they could move sharply.
So premiums are pretty favorable right now, is what you're saying.
Right now, things are still normal. But again, as you dig into on your site with all the things happening in the world,
Right.
and I guess maybe a good example of that is that Venezuela tried to get their gold back from the Bank of England a couple months ago. The Bank of England said no while citing sanctions on a transaction, or U.S. sanctions, a transaction that did not involve the U.S. Now, in the past couple months, we've seen reports of a default on a swap contract between Venezuela and some of the banks, and now apparently Deutsche Bank and I believe the other one was Citibank ended up with some of Venezuela's gold. And as folks who go to your site and research these things, a lot of mysterious, questionable things happening. Um, and you wonder how tight these markets are because, again, maybe if you don't end up with these chunks of gold, we hear a lot about these massive derivative books that these banks have. So to me, everything I'm seeing continues to indicate very tight supply, especially as central banks are buying. You have countries repatriating their gold.
Yep.
Everybody walking away from the dollar really at an accelerating rate at this point.
Yeah, anybody except for Maduro can get Venezuela's gold. Anybody out there, planet Earth, is welcome to Venezuela's gold, with the exception of Maduro. So it's
Isn't it
pretty incredible.
interesting? Isn't it interesting now how we've heard very little of Guaido? And I was talking
Right.
with a friend last night who was mentioning now it's as if he's no longer useful to the American regime and
Correct.
is like just gone back to being a regular guy that no one
Nobody had
listens
ever
to.
heard of.
So
Right, and it was a failed regime change. Everything failed, so push him aside. We got to quiet that down. So that's exactly what's happened. I mean, he surfaced. He's somewhere in Europe right now for whatever reason, probably getting more training on how to conduct a regime change overthrow of a country. And it's, until Russia, China, and Cuba leave Venezuela, nothing's going to change down there. Maduro is going to remain in power. And before we started recording, Chris, you and I were talking about cryptocurrencies and gold-backed cryptocurrencies. And what people overlook is that Venezuela has a gold-backed cryptocurrency. They use it right now. They've been using it since April of 2018. And who've they been using it with? Russia. Russia has stepped up immediately and said, "We will take that bet. We'll conduct business." They aren't saying what kind of business, how much business, but Russia immediately stepped up because they launched it in January. They launched the El Petro in January 2018. April 2018, Russia's knocking on their door saying, we'll do business in that manner. So, and because uh, President Putin said we see it as a way of getting around these sanctions. So it's a win-win for them. But I don't want to dwell on that. I just wanted to, as a side note on that. And you mentioned numismatics, and what are people actually buying right now, Chris? I mean, are people leaning more towards generics? Are they leaning more towards numismatics or bars, rounds? What's going on with that?
Well, in gold, we've seen a lot of people going for the pre-1933 US gold coins, which in gold right now seem to be one of the best values by a bit. We've seen people doing a lot of gold for silver swaps.
Really? Okay.
Pretty much any form of silver, bars and rounds, coins seem to be popular because, geez, I mean, what did we hit 90 to 1 on the gold to silver ratio?
Yep.
So I think within the precious metals community, there are a lot of people that are seeing, when you just look at the profile of the two, there's a lot of reason to believe that silver is incredibly cheap to gold relative at this point. So silver, pretty much any forms of silver, especially people who are stacking, folks that, get the arguments, see the inflation, just want the best bang for their buck. Silver has been popular. In gold, we've even seen people doing gold for gold numismatic swaps. Again, the premiums are still on the low side. So if you can get into something that you're knowledgeable about and feel comfortable with and understand the risks of the numismatics, certainly now is a good time to do so. And we've been seeing folks do that. But yeah, gold for silver swaps, gold for gold numismatic swaps, and especially while those premiums are low, have been pretty popular lately.
I'm not surprised that you're seeing a lot of gold for silver swaps with the gold silver ratio, because I was listening to somebody. It's only hit 90 to 1 four times in history that we're aware of, and that's an outsizing that, I mean, it's a rare occasion. So I still like, I just do the same thing every month. It's I used to pay a lot of attention to that, and that's actually what got me into this market. That's what the very first thing that caught my attention was, and it was way back when the gold silver ratio was like 42 to 1. It was like, woohoo! I mean, we would dive.
If I can point out that in that book that I've been doing on the silver market and the manipulation and the large paper short position, one of the things that I found really stunning is that most of the folks I've talked to about this, I think David Morgan commented on it, Craig Hemke, a few others, about how at this point, in terms of the amount of metal that's actually available in investment grade supply, we actually have less silver above ground in investment grade quality than gold, which I don't think most people realize. I mean, on one hand, you have the price of gold relative to silver, as you pointed out, has blown out, whereas in terms of what you can buy for investment grade purposes, less silver than gold. So you could even make the argument that if the ratio in the Earth's crust is somewhere in the 15 or 17 to 1 more silver than gold ratio, but if the actual supply, because so much of it is being consumed, has actually gone lower than that. Again, I'm not saying that the ratio is going to converge to that tomorrow, but certainly if you imagine what these pricing ratios will look like whenever we get to that point where it's not determined by all the bank nonsense, which again, with the conditions happening in the world, seems to be approaching more rapidly by the day. But whenever we see that, certainly a lot to indicate, or put another way, I don't know what the fundamental argument to see that ratio go higher would be versus, whenever we start getting into that environment where premiums are rising because it's hard to actually source metal. Yeah, I think there's a lot to support. We're going to see that number come down at some point.
Well,
So,
the mining, you said 15, 17 to one. It's actually about 9.5 to one. Is
okay.
what they're pulling out of the ground, and it might even be closer to 9 at this point because that number is a couple of years old. And we just had the number two, according to report that Steve St. Angelo over at SRS Rocco report he put out. I think
Yeah.
it's just a few weeks ago that the number two primary silver mine in Mexico closed, and Mexico is the number one producer of silver in the world. So that's a pretty big deal, and that supports
Mhm.
everything that you just said. And with that, I mean, what are you seeing as far as the sales? I mean, are your sales higher? Are they lower? Are they steady? I mean, what's going on with that? I mean, we were just talking. We've talked a little bit about the premiums. We've talked about what people are actually acquiring. Are they acquiring in mass? I mean, or what are your sales doing?
Sales recently have been steady to perhaps, let's say, slightly up. One of the notes I had from our sales desk was that all of a sudden we've seen a lot more interest from some of the managed money portfolio managers.
Okay.
Um, so, I mean, it's like when you look at what's happening in the world, it's becoming harder and harder to ignore. Also, you have some large mainstream investment advisors. I think Jeffrey Gundlach was buying gold again. Ray Dalio been talking about gold. So it is interesting. Again, there's it's not going nuts yet, but there's this steady demand from, fortunately, folks like you and the people that listen to the show and get that idea of not trying to be too clever with the price, and just at, whether it's the end of the week or the month, just realizing you're getting an asset that, whenever we see some sort of normalcy return to the markets, is going to have to be repriced a lot higher. And with that said, you actually just mentioned Mexico, which is interesting, where we've had, I don't know, we had a trade war for a couple of days, then somehow Trump changed his mind. So you never know exactly what the tariffs are going to be or against whom. But as you pointed out, Mexico, the largest silver producer. So it is interesting when you think about these trade wars. Now, are we going to see, gee, if Mexico put tariffs on the silver, you really start to see some of the Achilles of these current U.S. administration plans. I mean, now there's threats of conflict against Iran. By the way, I know you mentioned you were going to talk to London Paul tomorrow. He thinks that Iran actually even has more gold than Russia and China,
Yes.
who, of course, have been walking away from the dollar. So we have all these trade wars and sanctions and international conflicts. We talked about Venezuela, all of whom are walking away from the dollar.
Yep.
You know,
Steadily.
and again, all right, you don't want to trade with any of these places, which means, are you still counting on them to buy these treasury bonds where the supply is increasing faster than ever? So it's just, it's stunning and baffling to see it all at the same time. But then when you actually look into these, like again, if they start a trade war with Mexico, who has a lot of silver, does that mean that silver becomes even harder to come by? I believe India just responded to their escalating trade war. All right, you want to convince people, the Indian people, we're not talking about small countries here.
Right.
And rather than holding on to dollars, maybe they say, gee, well, why don't we just get more gold and silver? Um, so I think the world is starting to notice that, which is why I thought it was interesting to hear that, we're hearing more from some managed money funds and certainly, it's as you point out, the fundamentals are obvious enough that I think it's really how quickly do people break away from the Wall Street, CNBC hypnosis? Because when you see what's going on, I mean, it paints a clear picture. And we haven't hit that break point yet, but certainly it looks like we're getting there at a rapidly accelerating rate.
Yes, and you mentioned India, and what I found interesting in 2018, and I believe that it's carried over into 2019, is that India's central bank has acquired more gold. And
Hmm.
if this is not a signal to the world that something is afoul, then I don't know what is, because India has long been a lapdog when it comes to the gold market. They've paid they've done exactly what they've been told, and that's don't acquire gold. And in 2018, the central bank acquired more gold. And like I said, I can't remember if they've acquired more. I think that they did in May again, and they're small amounts, but it doesn't matter. The fact that they are adding gold to their central bank hoard is huge news, in my opinion. May be wrong, may be making a mountain out of a molehill, but if you have been paying attention to the dynamics of India and gold over the past few years, it sure looks like something has gone very, very wrong in that regard. And the fundamentals, gold sniffs out all these problems. That's part of its job. And this
Right.
whole thing that just happened in Iran with or not Iran, but in the Gulf of Oman, with those two oil tankers, not even CNN believes that. I mean, even CNN looked at that and said, well, this is not exactly right here. Something's wrong with this picture. And what was his name? uh, Abe was literally sitting across the
Yeah, that
table
was
from the prime minister
another
of
wacky
Iran, and
one in
it's like,
there.
hello, prime
Yeah.
minister of Iran is going, why in the world would I attack Japan? I'm sitting here in conversation with the man. I'm looking him right in the eye right now. Are you kidding me? So everybody knows that there's something wrong with that, and that whole thing stinks. And we've been talking a lot about the supply. Are you guys seeing or hearing anything with supply issues at this point? Or are all the lines open, or are there some inklings anywhere as far as, usually 90% silver is usually one of the first areas where we start seeing real supply issues, and then it kind of moves into either the 10-ounce bars or some other particular aspect. Are you guys seeing anything with the supply issues at this point?
Right now, things are normal.
Okay, that's
And
good.
it's interesting that you point out with especially the 90% silver and silver in general, where, when you have something that's tight that can change quickly. Right now, things are normal, though. Although I know you remember the U.S. Mint had delayed or halted the Silver Eagle sales. I guess it was twice within the last year.
Yes.
Um, and again, but it's like you point out, you have central banks, I guess, buying the most gold in the last 50 years since
Yep.
really the collapse of the London gold pool. I wonder, I mean, if they're, it's not rocket science we're talking about. I mean,
Right.
maybe we could send daily coin videos to some of these central banks. I would imagine that if they understand the reasons to buy gold, you would think some of these folks, I wonder when we'll start seeing some of these central banks buy silver. Certainly, if I were in a country that was being sanctioned or bullied by the US government, I mean, you really do have a vulnerable spot there. Um, And I mean, it was interesting. There was a recent report from the IMF about how, things are okay, but there could be trouble if the governments don't get their debt situations under control. Which, oh, well, that's great. I mean, it's okay as long as they don't do this, which they're doing. I mean, they're expanding the debt faster than ever. Um, so again, at the moment, the premiums and the supply issues, things are normal, but certainly from everything you're seeing, it's really almost been forced to end up in a situation where that changes. And certainly, as we saw in 2008, 2011, things look normal for a while. And when you really have these
Right.
stresses, especially in silver, that's the one that I keep an eye on to see when things change. I know, in fact, one last point there is that we had another meeting with Mnuchin and some of the regulatory agencies. Our friend Dave Kranzler has pointed out that he thinks something has already broken, and we're just waiting to find out about it. Deutsche Bank still getting pummeled. Um, and it does remind me a lot of the conditions when I was back on the trading floor in 2007, 2008, um, where different parts of these things happen when they do. You had mortgage bonds that were already defaulting, yet took a while for things to be priced in. But certainly a lot of things on high alert at this point, and it's going to be an interesting summer for sure.
That's what it seems like. It seems like, or you mentioned that the supply lines are normal, or and the premiums are normal until they're not. And it's the same thing that we see for those that are paying attention. It's seeing the exact same thing in the stock market, in all these rigged markets. They're all rigged. Everybody knows that, and they're all fine up until the moment that they're not. And we don't know when that moment is coming, but I think that it's a lot closer than most people believe. And I think that what we're going to see over this summer is some serious gyrations, just like what we've been seeing in the gold and silver market. I mean, the gold bulls, man, they've been putting up a serious fight the past couple of weeks, and the algorithms, the force is always strong in them because all they have to do is push a button and everything starts changing. And but the bulls, they just keep fighting back, and they have been, and that says a lot in my opinion. And I agree with Dave. I think that he and I talked about it a couple of years ago, that something is broken. Something's been broken in the background that we can't see, and it's been broken for some time. And we know that the economy, the global economy, was broken in 2008, period. It's just a question of how quickly the rot becomes, becomes seen by everybody. I mean, they've been able to paper over it and paint a picture of unicorns and rainbows, but the unicorns and rainbows are beginning to fade. So those
And when
are,
you look at just, forget, I know I get it that people are frustrated. It's been a tough 8 years in gold and silver. Although when you just look, and again, I think there's been a lot of effort in the West to get people to think a certain way. But
yes,
again, if the whole goal is to buy low and sell high, I could see if, the Dow Jones were 10 or 13,000 and silver was trading $40 and gold was at 2,500, then that would certainly make the decision a bit different. But I mean, you're talking about silver that's below what it costs to get it out of the ground. So someone's
yes,
going to go sit there in a mine, figure out how to borrow money to get equipment, finance things to lose money. So that, again, I think it's important to point out as just a natural floor. again, you have all these conditions going on in the world, essentially where gold and silver's value is the highest. It's like the house is on fire, yet the price of insurance is still, they're offering it for free.
Right.
Where at the same time, I mean, now I'll be. It's only fair to point out, yeah, I missed the equity rally of the last 7, 8 years. And sure, going back in hindsight, I don't. I would say I don't think a lot of people realized things were as manipulated as they were, because when you had that money printing, you would have expected gold and silver to rise perhaps even faster than the stocks. Yet, hey, we're now here where stock markets have tripled or more. I think the NASDAQ is up 5 or 6 fold. So outside of the Fed printing more and being able to prop these up further, which I have no doubt they'll try, but I mean, housing at all close to all-time highs. Look at the bond market. I mean, we have John Williams calculating inflation of 9 or 10%, and people are piling into treasuries for a 2% yield to lock in a negative 8% real return.
Right.
So I mean, it's like you have all these other things at highs. You have things like gold and silver, really on the low end. So I get it that, it's tough in certain ways, but if we remember what has, you talk to any investor who's successful, well, if you have patience and let things converge over time versus, I mean, what's really the argument to make for piling into Amazon, to sell gold and silver based on the fundamentals that are out there? So I think, again, like many things in life, if you have patience, you do your homework and understand that there are certain factors that, occur in between here and there, but look at really what ultimately I would say has to occur at some point. Um, Again, I'm not trying to convince anyone to do something that's not in their best interest. In fact, Miles Franklin, we do a lot of gold buying as well, contacting shops that buy gold. So really our goal is to provide a safe place that for any needs people have in gold and silver, that you can go somewhere that you're getting what you pay for, that things are safe, that we have a track record of 30 years without a customer complaint, because we want to help people get what they're looking for and do good business and form good relationships. So again, we're happy to help with whatever you need. And I'm just sharing in terms of what I'm looking at, and what I would do with my own money. Certainly, I'd rather own gold and silver than, some of these things that based on my career look like we're seeing massive bubbles, but also that are nearing their endpoint.
Yes, and you said that, you were talking about the equity markets growing. I missed it too, Chris, and I have absolutely zero regrets about it. Zero. Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency market, I have zero regrets about missing any of that. I didn't miss anything because I didn't participate in any of it. So I didn't. How could I miss something that I didn't that I wasn't involved with? So I could care less. I know that there's schemes or scams. It's set up to cheat and rob people. And okay, whatever. If you're happy with the way that it's gone for you, then I'm happy for you. But I'm okay with where I'm at right now, because I'm looking more at protecting my family realistically than some shot in the dark or some get rich quick scheme. I'm not into that. So I would much rather be partnered with you, Miles Franklin, gold and silver, something that's real, tangible, that I know is going to serve me in the long run, And when things get tough, it's still going to be there. When things fall apart, it's still going to be there, period. So,
Yep.
but we've been speaking with Chris Marcus, and like I said, he can find all his great work over at Arcadia Economics, arcadiaeconomics.com. You can find him also over at Miles Franklin. And please visit Miles Franklin at milesfranklin.com. And Chris, give them the phone number over there so they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, happy to help with any questions you have. And again, that doesn't mean you need to buy anything today or sell anything. I feel this is important stuff. This is why I left my career on Wall Street, to be able to help people understand what was coming. So you can reach me. My personal cell phone is 720-363-3791. And I'm happy to help with this. And if you do need something, we can get you a quote on that as well. But I think it's certainly a fascinating time in the world, but doesn't have to be the Armageddon that a lot of folks talk about. I mean, certainly there are things that I would do differently than the government, but what, I always found very liberating as I was breaking out of the Wall Street matrix and coming to this perspective is that when you see what's happening and you plan and allocate things appropriately for whatever is right for you, you can use it to your advantage, not at the expense of someone else, but just, preparing and knowing what's happening in the world and how to ensure yourself against that. Rory, like you said, I think you get the advantage of the one thing that really has stood the test of time and value for thousands of years. Well, we'll see how long it takes for the banks to blow themselves up on this one. The fact that they're rigging things lower, and you can get metal on discount the same way China and basically everyone outside of the U.S. government is doing.
Exactly.
So if we can help, again, you can reach me at 720-363-3791.
All right, Chris. Thank you very much. What about the email address? You got an email?
Yeah, you can reach me at cmarcus@milesfranklin.com. That's CMARCUS at milesfranklin.com. Happy to answer any questions and, help your listeners get whatever they need, whether that's just information or an actual product.
All right. Well, we will do this again in just 2 or 3 weeks from now and see what's going on with the market, see what's happening with Miles Franklin. And once again, appreciate all your time today, Chris.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It will be interesting to see what new trade wars we have by then. Yeah, it's always a pleasure and honor to join you, and I'll look forward to checking in again soon, my friend.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.